Welcome to Portals of Perception. Central to the Portals inquiry about the future is the journey of discovering and mapping the 4 zones of transformation. How do we transform in our interior as individuals? How do we transform as collectives in the way we uplift and encourage each other? How do we transform our maps of meaning and the sense-making and perception maps? And how do we transform the world? The economic model, the educational model, all those infrastructures that hold this world. And then also that 5th space, invisible, intangible, other dimension in the middle, where spirit and art appear. And today we are in conversation with Rufus Pollock and Sylvie Barbier. Rufus is a systems researcher and decoder. He is a cultural activist and social entrepreneur and the founder and co-founder of several for-profit and non-profit initiatives, including Life Itself and the Open Knowledge Foundation. His book, Open Revolution, is about making radically freer and fairer information age. His next book, Wiser Societies, is about the cultural dark matter that enables societies to be wiser and weller. Sylvie Barbier is a French-Taiwanese artist. Her work synthesizes Eastern and Western philosophies and aesthetics. She is the co-founder of Life Itself, an endeavor dedicated to practical actions for a radically wiser, weller world. So I don't know if you'll agree with this mapping, but in my preparation, which is why I thought I'd describe it in this way, I felt that you have been on an evolutionary journey, worked, endeavored, and played in these 4 zones and in that space in the middle. And I'm very excited for the spaces we are going to explore today. Sylvie, Rufus, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Well, so let us begin with inviting you to describe what is the portal you are in at this time, which is a fancy way of asking what are you working on at this time?
I'll start. So currently I'm working on a performance art show called Metamorphosis. And the name says it all, in the sense that it's trying to depict the journey that we individually go of metamorphosis. We're not born one way. We often evolve, change, and these evolutions, they're moments of growth, and growth often comes with a moment of darkness before you touch the light. And it's not just maintains to when we're children, it continues as we grow into our adulthood. And so often it was based on my autobiography, what I had to go through. But I always said, like, inside myself, there's also the whole of humanity. Like, I can find the whole of humanity in my experience. And in my performance, I always try to revive the sacred sense of art. Art used to be really connected to spirituality, religion, politics, and it's now become very secular. And we live in an extremely secular world where, at least in Europe, people don't go to churches anymore. Maybe you're spiritual, but people are no longer religious, and religious is to relier, to link with one another. And I like to re-presence that meaning of the word, because it's a very charged word. And I think people have a lot of, like, maybe even collective trauma about the word religion. And it's important to heal that word. So in using it, I want to reconquer this word religion, which is to relink ourselves to each other, and to something greater than ourselves. And I think art plays a huge part in that, because you don't do art. Art is to express our humanity, what makes us human. And we can so easily forget what makes us human. So I think it's essential to reconnect to that dimension and connect to it collectively. So I like to say that my performances or spectacle shows are forms of contemporary ritual for the secular modern human being. So that the audience can go for a transformation themselves. They have a moment where they're held by beauty, by the art, to look into themselves and look into where they want to really go as a human being and where we want to go collectively. So that's one thing among many other things that we're up to, but it's the thing that is currently the closest to my heart. And Rufus and I are also like starting to collaborate on the book, on the topic of the second Renaissance, which is also very related to Metamorphosis. I would say Metamorphosis is on more an individual level, and second Renaissance is, I think, is to put a name onto what we're collectively experiencing, which is the death of modernity and the birth of something to come, which we don't know yet. And that moment of death and birth is the second Renaissance. Like the first Renaissance appeared after a great moment of difficulty, of hardship with the Black Death, where many people died. And they could not say that they were going through the Renaissance. And it was in that also moment, there were rediscovery of the antique tradition, the classics. And I think currently we're also experiencing a form of social collective death of the modern era. And something is about to be born. And I think in that something, there's the rediscovery of what we call ancient wisdom. Regardless of the religion, there is actually deep wisdom in ancient traditions that are being rediscovered and updated with our current situation. And in the midst of winter, it is so important to remember that after winter comes spring, that even if the tree looks dead, inside the tree, it's full of life. And there's a bud coming. Now, we don't know what that bud, what flower it comes out, what color it is, what size of leaf is it. But spring is coming, and it's important to look for it because it gives us hope while we go through winter. And it's also important to be able to distinguish what is truly a new spring versus another winter. Are we nourishing really the new spring to come? Or are we feeding another winter to last longer? I could go on about other things, but I think it's a good start.
Yeah, that's just so beautifully compelling. Perhaps just staying with you a little longer, Sylvie, the performance, the performance dimension. What media will be involved in what you're building?
So in the performance, I work in mixed media. So one, I perform myself, because it's maybe if I compare to theater, pure theater, when you're an actor, you pretend to be someone else, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
In this occasion, I'm not pretending to be someone else. I come fully as myself. And so that I would say is, for example, one distinction. I also use video projection to englobe all the senses of the audience and the different sensibility. I work with also two extraordinary artists and musicians, Laetitia Donoma and Mathieu Lebrun, who are really working on the music and the sound dimension. And I think the part of art is to, in a way, by subliming it, working with the light, the costume and everything, it makes it looks unreal so that you talk about reality. It's like you talk about reality to make reality more touchable in a way, more able to pause and look. I think the love of all the medium is a reflection of, in myself, of my multiplicity. I think whatever is needed we'll use for what is appropriate to be said.
So there is music, there is video media, there will be movement, I'm guessing, there are words. Yeah. It's a multi-dimensional hologramic experience. You will be inviting people into, in a sense, catalyzing an ecology inside of which they may be able to come on a journey with you to experience the metamorphic journey that you will take them into.
Absolutely. And also,
I call it transformative opera.
I call them transformative operas.
The opera of the beyond the modern era. How do we go?
And also one key dimension is every performance I do, there is an interactive dimension where the audience have the opportunity to move out of a passive form. Often how we consume art and how we look at our life is a very passive form. We sit and we wait to receive or to be told what to do. And the audience is given many opportunities to be able to share and reflect. And for that's the part that excites me the most every time, because it makes it alive. It makes it unpredictable. I have no idea how the audience is going to react. And so I'm creating with them. And that makes it that every time I perform it, it's different. It's never the same. And it's so because it's in relationship with the present moment, with life itself.
And the core theme you're saying is the journey, the metamorphosis journey, the journey of reconnecting to self, reconnecting to the bigger, something Absolutely. Else that we are part of.
Maybe describe it.
I can maybe also give you a little picture. There's many chapters or tableaux, but one is, it came from a personal reflection of, in this space, we're in this interrogation of what is the new future, right? Like that's one of it. And in being in those conversations, it seems to me that people are obsessed about the future, but they never seem to look that we tend to not create a new future. We just put our past into the future, right? And what is that in our consciousness is the figure of the ghost that haunts you and haunts the future and eats the future alive. And in every tradition, there's the figure of the ghost. And there's a reason why that symbol exists, because it's very real. Like literally, if we don't complete our past, if we're not complete with our ancestors, if we don't honor our ancestors and choose what we want to take with us and what we want to let go, we're just actually producing more of the same. And so in the show, I actually start with that figure of the ghost. And with projections of, there was fires that happened in France, so a quite chaotic figure, and I share the stories of my ancestor, and I give the opportunity for the audience to share the story of their ancestors, and what do they want to let go, and what do they want to honor, and then I move on to a figure that is a very animalistic figure. Without words and on four legs. And that's, if you notice, what is so unique to human being is our verticality. We are one of the animal that stands on two legs and is vertical. And that is a symbol of awareness, awakenness. But we don't live our symbol very often. Most animals are on four legs and are horizontal. And when we human beings are horizontal, that's when we sleep, when we're unaware, when we're unconscious. And so going from like babies, from four-legged to vertical is the moment where you gain awareness. Who am I? Where am I? What is the world I'm in? But that moment of becoming vertical is the moment of birth, and is the first trauma of separation, is the moment where you get pulled from the soil. And with that awareness comes separation, the fear of separation, which is ultimately truly an illusion. And basically, the rest of the journey, which I'm not going to describe the whole show, is how do you have awareness and heal from that fear of separation to be aware and yet present that you are actually one. How does that look like? What do we have to go through to restate the moment of full presence, like the infant, like the animal, but yet maintaining that verticality? And I think that's the journey that is on offer for every human being. Now, we might not complete the whole circle. We might go for only a part, depending on our life choice and path and difficulty. But each stage of gaining more awareness of our oneness and that we are an illusion of separation comes more bliss.
Yes.
More liberation.
So there is in that a gesturing to some of the mystery shows or mystery performance of various spiritual traditions, and even a gesturing all the way to the origination of the theatrical experiences in the very ancient world, in the ancient Greek culture. And at the same time, what you're describing has about it a midwifery crucible for what is emerging now at the individual and possibly at the collective level, all of it together inside the work of art. So you just described to us something we would want to stay with and bask in the presence of for the rest of the conversation, and unfold various pathways that come out of that and back into that. That's just so beautiful. Thank you for that. So Rufus, where would you pick the story and bring yourself into this theater that Sylvie just described in terms of the work you're doing at this time?
Well, I mean, one is obviously Sylvie's work is an incredible inspiration to me, and one also that we engage in collaboration. And one of the things that I see more and more is how, when you're in a close collaboration like we are, life partners, but also work partners, where does the, one's in a dance. I don't know, I had this vision the other day. I don't know, when I was at school, there's a picture of two electrons, I think, orbiting, and they kind of form a field. They're not really a particle. There's this kind of field, but they're interwoven. So I kind of had this beautiful kind of figure of eight of this kind of field of the electrons spinning around this nucleus. And I was thinking of that in our collaboration. Personally, I think there's two parts for me. So where am I at? One is in trying to concretize and make real and practical some of the ideas. I mean, in a way, there's an analogy, which is, I think, at one level, what Sylvie describes so powerfully, at least for me, is how do we, what the artist does is in a weird way make real. I mean, I know the whole point of art is in a certain way, but make real or make tangible or make tasteable something that is maybe transcendent, or something that's some insight that otherwise can seem very abstract. And similarly, so there's a lot of talk, about like, what does this future look like? And one of the things I'm very interested in is how do we try that out on the ground for real? How do we form committed conscious communities or collectives or businesses that are kind of test driving this, or experimenting with, or pioneering the culture of the future, or the cultures of the future. And so what does that mean? Like right now, where we are right now is in Bergerac in Southwest France, very near Plum Village, Zen monastery. And we're trying to say, like, okay, there's a hub here, there's kind of, how can we make a neighborhood where people are starting to live, trying out being in a transformative neighborhood, if you like. And all of the, just like relationships in books, always like, the prince and the princess meet, and then, we we go off into the sunset, and that's the end. And they always like live happily after. And there's never like, well, you were supposed to, do the washing up yesterday, but you left all your stuff, or, what about, you were supposed to take the kids to school, or whatever the reality is. So one of the things that I'm very interested in is making kind of teal real, or however you want to use the terminology. How do we test drive that on the ground with all of the messiness that often is involved, of that, and but also the joy in learning of that. So that's something I'm particularly interested in, both the theory and the practice of that. I could say more about that if you want, but.
I do. So there is because as I studied your work, there is a dimension of the big picture mapping of the movement that you are decoding, unfolding. Yeah. There is that. There is the even bigger story that this is part of, and there is what you're not describing, which is the concretization to life itself. So I'm actually interested to ask you to try to describe this moment in time evolutionarily at a high level, because there are different narratives, different stories, just because you have been on a couple of decades evolutionary story, worked in technology, founded the shaped in some ways the open revolution and story. So what is the moment we are in right now? How do you tell yourself that story?
Well, first, I'm going to say that this is always like, you're going to be humble in that it's very difficult to know where you are in history at the moment when you're there in it. I mean, there's a reason history is in the past. So, Hegel's phrase, the owl of Minerva flies at midnight. So, if we went back, would it have been
I will just point out that in my work, at least, we make a distinction between his story and her story. And we've just been present to her story in the beginning of this conversation, which is what is emerging right here, right now. And we're trying to, as you're saying, decode some of it in the moment, please.
Well, I'll do my best. So I just say with the humility of you don't really know where you are in the arc of emergence, right? So the metaphor I would say is, let's say you go back to the last great transition I think that humanity went through, which is really pre-modern to modern. So this was from basically the Catholic Church, medieval times, which extended back into Rome and stuff, and forward to modernity, which, the peak of which would be, I don't know, the French Revolution is the final victory, or 1850 or 1950 or something. So that's 1,000-year journey between, the High Middle Ages and, now. And we are going through, I think, another one of those great transitions, culturally, socially, economically, but I would say most profoundly ontologically. So in how we see ourselves as human beings, how we see the world, what we view, what we value. And I think I'm always trying to say how difficult that those changes are, is if I live as someone under the end of the Catholic Church before basic Protestantism, the most important thing for me in the world is to go to heaven. And the way to do that is through the Catholic Church. And someone is about to come along and tell me that, no, I'm only going to go to heaven through faith alone, through my own actions, and through reading the Bible. And that, in fact, if I go to this old, massive institution that's been around for 1,000 years, the Catholic Church, which has all of this authority, all of this integration into my society. In fact, I may go to hell. I will be damned. I mean, I just think it's sometimes difficult to conceive of how massively, like, ontologically, like, ground shaking that must have been for people. And I mentioned Protestantism because people think of, like, you know, the Enlightenment or something as the moment of the victory of modernity, but in a way, Protestantism and many things are like really the precursor of that, of individuality, really, many things. So thinking for yourself kind. And so at this moment, you know, we live in a civilization, or I live at least in a civilization, not everyone on earth, but the kind of, I would say, like, the lead, for good or ill, like a leading edge or dominant, not I'm saying it's a good thing, dominant civilization, or it's like, you know, materialist, kind of reductionist, you know, religion largely has kind of been pushed to the edges we just discussed. More is better, more stuff is better. You know, we can describe it. And, you know, that just want to really acknowledge, like Sylvie mentioned this point before, not to denigrate that. Like, there's often a lot of denigration, but wow, you know, we have modern healthcare, we have all these amazing things. But that system is kind of not working, right? I think that for people probably on this podcast, I don't need to go into detail, but, you know, we're constantly more materially and so on. There's a bankruptcy kind of the economic system, and there's probably a bankruptcy of the kind of meaning system, of sense making. There's breakdown. And just as I think in the end of the Middle Ages, the beginning of the Renaissance, the period even of Protestantism through till later, there's a huge clash of sense making. There's a huge clash between how to make sense of what's going on in reality, like what of meaning making. So just that example of, like, is the Catholic Church got the truth, or has Martin Luther got the truth? You know, does you know, even over COVID, you know, do scientists have it, or, you know, should you take the vaccine? Or, you know, you could just see these kind of breaking apart of, like, how we make sense or agreement about what's going on. So where are we in the process of emergence, which is the question you asked me? I think something has definitely accelerated in the last 10 years. When I'm 43. When I grew up, you know, there was a kind of, it was working, you know, like the democratic West had won, you know, China would go down, you know, like there was a story, like there wasn't a lot of alternative thinking. I think in the last decade, the number of people who now think that something is foundationally wrong versus, like, just not working, like, oh yeah, things don't work, but foundationally, in the foundations of our civilization, is grown massively. You know, I don't know what percentage it is, but I think double digits possibly now. But the number of people who go from that either out of despair into hope, or like into finding solutions, is still, I think, quite small. If I'm honest, I think for myself, the sad thing is, I remember asking a Zen teacher once, and when do people change? I asked him, and he said, when they have to. So the point was that people normally needed quite a serious crisis of some kind, unfortunately, in their personal life before they take on deep change. And similarly, as a civilization, the sad thing is, I think that we're going to have to confront a very significant crisis to really change. So to go back, Sylvie mentioned that the last time, you know, the Middle Ages, the medieval system broke down. I mean, you know, in the 14th century, maybe 50% of the population of Europe died. You know, that was extreme. You know, there was massive bad famines. The economic system of the Middle Ages broke down. Basically, there was overpopulation. Probably what drove the Black Death. There was also a reaction. The church had opened up in the 13th century, people know, and then it got repressed. You know, there was the High Middle Ages at Chartres and Thomas Aquinas, and things that got more aggressive. There was quite a lot of repression of, like, proto-Protestantism for about a century, but obviously it would then break forth. You know, I would love to say, like, you know, in the next decade, we're going to transition, you know, we're going to wake up as a civilization. The best probability is that, you know, while I hope it won't be existential, there may be a kind of really tough time. You know, we're not dealing with the climate crisis adequately. So where we are, I think it's not going to be centuries as it was the last time, if it goes well, but it may be decades. So that's where I think we are. And then, you know, last example I always have that I'm pessimistic, well, not pessimistic or optimistic, but there's a guy called Roberto Unger, who's an incredible political thinker. he's now at Harvard, but he's from Brazil. And basically, he's a progressive, relatively radical political thinker who started in the 70s. And his kind of thing is like, I basically spent my whole life waiting for not quite the revolution, but he's not a revolutionary actually. But he's like, I'm going to die before I see the movements I'd like to see. His whole life has been seen in the period of reaction, basically, I would say, from the 70s, politically across all of the world. And, he's like, my stuff is in a bottle. So I don't know. I hope it's next year. But I would be realistic. I think that right now we're at a point of planting seeds of a second Renaissance. We're planting seeds, and I hope they will bloom and start connecting, but we don't yet have a forest.
Okay. Well, so thank you for that. We want to describe some of the seeds and some of the germination. Just where you ended there, it brings up in me the mindset of those masons who started building a cathedral, who knew that even their children will not actually see the cathedral, but the grandchildren will actually walk into a complete cathedral. However, we are now in a space of acceleration, and yes, what took centuries is likely unfolding in a much rapid manner, maybe exactly, years.
Exactly.
And the other awareness that comes alive for me in both the way you describe the Renaissance is that, well, so if you come with a linear reductionist view to this moment in time, you'd say the world is crumbling, the modernity project is falling apart. But if you bring a little more complex, sophisticated, nuanced view to this, and you are integrating 5 or 6 or 7 different dimensions to the story, you'd say, well, actually, could it be that the evolutionary process needs regressive cycles because they have a function, they have a purpose. They discovered they discovered this in a software world, that when you implement a new system, a new operating system, what the function of the testers is they go back to the other foundational layers in the system to see where it will fall apart, where it will break, and where do they need to re-architect the system. And in a way, you could say that we've gone through very quickly over the last 2 or 3 centuries and created a lot of wonderful results and distorted results. And part of what needs to break down is to fix some of the bugs in the system. And that's part of the gory and glorious process we are going through that you're describing as a second Renaissance. So before we go more to the inquiry of the second Renaissance, can you describe a little bit the mapping? Because one of the dimensions in your work is you kind of create big picture maps. What is that project about? What is propelling it? And see if you can describe it and what you're creating there.
Okay, if I just I'll just try.
I think you're muted. No,
I'm not muted. Well, very simply, one of the things in a new area like this, so let's say there's an emerging ecosystem. I mean, let's even say there's multiple ecosystems of activity. And again, let's pick an analogy. If you went back to, I'm picking the 1510s of Martin Luther, or you could go back to early Christianity or something. There were these sects popping up all over the place, right? There were famously, now it's like Martin Luther, but at the time there had just been like, there was Luther, but then there were other people. There were people in England, there were people in the Netherlands, there were people doing this, that, and the other. So similarly, right now, there is a lot of different activity, and just like trying to map what people are doing and maybe connect some more of those together is one of the activities. And out of that, and I think it's a delicate thing, it's like what even distinguishes it? So for example, at the moment, I think a distinguishing feature for some people thinking about the future is whether you think that like some foundational change is needed, what I would call a paradigmatic change. It sounds like a slightly grandiose word, but what I mean is do we just need to like tweak capitalism? Do we need more, oh, there's inequality, it's bad, say we need to have more redistribution? Or is there something like really foundationally that needs to shift? Do we need to foundationally shift in like how we treat nature? Or is it just more like, oh, we need to like treat nature as another ecosystem service that we put on the balance sheet? And, yeah, I mean, that might help a bit, but there's something probably quite foundational about how we see nature a little bit, or, it's something to be exploited versus something that we are in kind of in balance with, for example. So one, just to kind of go back in this ecosystem mapping that we're trying to do, or others people are trying to do, is see these emerging fields and look at also feature them. So in this case, like, actors who are interested in paradigmatic change. I think another thing you mentioned right at the beginning of the show was, I think reference of like 4 quadrants of integral or other things, but is basically integrated change. So even today, some people might say, I'm going to do complex systems work, but neglect not that's valuable. And I think you need like inner cultural or inner work, integrated activity where you're both shifting mindset and culture and you're shifting kind of institutions and laws. So those kind of ecosystems of actors or stakeholders who are thinking in that way is something that we've been mapping at Life Itself now for 3 or 4 years, with collaboration with many others, with Commonweal, Excoret, the FETSA Institute now, and variety of many others. And that's something I think I also want to emphasize often, the ecosystem of ecosystems, just as it would turn out that Protestant sects, there's Calvinists, there's this, I think there's many different overlapping ecosystems, but there's underlying maybe principles that we see emerging of paradigmatic, integrated, and I would call engaged or pragmatic actors, people who are seeking to also do stuff in the world. Those are kind of key principles that we see across multiple areas.
So is there in this also an element of, alongside the mapping, an endeavor to decode the operating system that's emerging in the middle of what you perhaps would describe as the principles that are perennially present in all those various endeavors, or that's not part of the quest?
Well, there's 2 bits when you say decode. I mean, I think that I think, well, look to Sylvie here, it's like there's 2 things, right? What does the cultural code of a future look like? And when cultural code can sound fancy, but let's say, again, just analogy, the easiest way is to think of like there was the Roman Empire and then you had Christianity. And I just was on an incredible talk with a guy called Joseph Henrich at Harvard. He's got this really interesting thing about cultural evolution, which is, there was this incredible cultural variant, which was the Catholic Church. And why was the Catholic Church so unusual? Well, it banned cousin marriage. It banned marrying your wife's sister when your wife died. It banned having multiple partners, by the way. What the Catholic Church did is it basically did a load of rules that were culturally really unusual. For example, I don't know if you know, but 85 of what we study, 85% of different human societies allow men to have multiple partners. So only 15% of societies have been monogamous, of which the West kind of turned out to be one. Those features that were really unusual, this cultural package of basically what destroyed kinship networks. What it did is it made it much harder to have extended families, because normally you bind them together by having cousin marriage. Long story short, this moved you to a world of much greater individualism. So one question right now that's really interesting is what does a cultural code of the future look like? And, for example, one thing is that I think is a commonplace, Wilbur and many others talk to, is we need a kind of religion of the future. One of the things that we did in the secular West is we've thrown out religion to a great extent. And Sylvie spoke to this and so on.
Yeah, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the points you mentioned. Like first, like when it says like we need a religion of the future, I don't think it's to start with. I don't think it's one. I think in some of it might be a similar renaissance of old religion, but updated is not the right word, but often religion are sacred, right? You can't touch them. But you can't touch them because why we can't touch them? Because we're trying to say there's something of the essence that is untouchable, that is eternal. But somehow along the line, what becomes untouchable might be the words rather than the essence, or the cultural frame in which that religion was born. So each religion, like a religion, is also born in a cultural frame, into a perception of reality, and so that then gets sticky because it's sacred. But what is sacred was not the cultural frame, was the essence of it. And I think, I believe that yes, the future needs several or new religions, or updated of old religions, because they're ultimately, you need something much bigger than yourself to transcend the problem of individuality, of like me, that modernity gave us, which we have to remember, the group was very oppressive. There's a reason why we got into individuality, because just bluntly put, if you look now in Afghanistan, or in Iran, you have a window perception of what that could be like. And so there's a reason why we got individual. Now we got to transcend that and include our past. And so to transcend that, it's important to get to the essence of what those religions were telling us, appropriated to each local culture, in each local reality, the essence, but transcendent in the sense to include our modernity, include what we've learned on our journey so far. I think so. And yes, religion is important. We are not going to get out of this through the lenses of a secular modernity. And when I wrote a post saying, like, in the secular world, the ego is God, because it's, Descartes wrote, like, I think, therefore I am. It's all about my want. And now it's becoming not I think, therefore I am, is I feel, therefore I am. It's about what I feel like. I want to feel good, and etc. But it's still I. And you can't get out of this with the I mindset. And now there's all this like, oh, we move to we. But what does it mean to move to we? You know, what does it mean to move to we politically? What does it mean to move to we economically? What does it mean to move to we spiritually? And it does mean things really concretely. It's not just some wonderful Walt Disney story. Like, and that's we're gonna have to shade certain of our old skin away, you know, and do that with a lot of compassion. That like, we are modern children. We are children of modernity. And I know that there's something of the future that is much bigger than me, that demands me to grow, is a demand for me to grow. I don't know how much I will be able to grow and shade away my past that I also inherited from my ancestor. But I know that for that future to have a chance, a real shot, I need to grow and go beyond myself. And I need to have a love of compassion that I might not be able to, you know, like that I'm very likely not going to get it, right?
The first time, at least.
Right. The first time, or even the 100th time. It's like, if you try to have it, then we need to get somewhere as a society or as individual, that you need to be somehow different. That is the very thing that traps you into the past.
Yeah.
Because then you repeat more of the same. If you have it like, we need to now be this, I need to be this, and then it will be fine. Then it will be fine. You're still trapped in the same frame. You're still locked. And so if you can let go of like, yes, there's something that is calling us to go forward, and will like, and it's just something to embrace, to like have a leap of faith into. And I now talk about faith, and if faith is an absolutely crucial dimension, and I want to distinguish faith with belief. So growing up in a quite secular, rational world, like I was quite scared of religions, you know, like people could believe anything or nothing, and they put in themselves in this, it would do harm others and harm themselves in the name of certain belief system. But yet when I saw people who had faith, that sometimes I confuse with belief, but what's this like, it's not really distinction. I'd have a lot of like longing. Like I would like to have faith, you know, like, but how do I have faith? And I would say belief is, you can believe in anything. You can believe in the illusion and the trap of your own mind, and does not require you to do any thinking. But faith is based on a direct experience of something beyond you. Faith is anchored into an empirical experience of yourself as a human being. And that is something that you can ground yourself to, that allows you to do that leap of faith. You can have faith in that experience.
Yeah.
Faith is crucial because we don't know where we're going. And we don't know if we'll get there. We don't know when we'll get there. We don't know what it looks like. So you have to have a leap of faith in something bigger than yourself. Because what the world, the problem that we're facing is demanding that from us. And I say something really challenging is, we could resolve the climate crisis or whatever crisis is happening by something that looks maybe very horrible, which is, let's say half of the planet dies. It's resolved. And then what? You're going to have another problem and another problem. And so those problems are rising. They're a demand of us to really grow in our humanity, yes, to have a revolution in what it means to be a human being, not in what we do or like the revolution of being a human being generates new actions, new ways of being. But it's not like the result, because yes, ultimately, we all heading for the one same direction, is we're going to end up in the ground and dirt is going to be put on our face. Now, what are we going to do while we're alive as a human being? In this body mind, yeah, what revolution can we bring about what it means to be a human being?
Well, let me try and narrate back to you the way I internalize the story you offer there. First, there is something precious you're saying and sacred about the axial religions. However, two or three things to be aware of in there. Largely, they appeared with a few individuals, and then there was always the class of the few who were empowered and were the representative of the knowledge, the power, the sacred, and that operating system is partly what had to be broken in the story you were telling earlier about the first Renaissance. So the emergence of the self through the Renaissance and the Enlightenment and what has happened in recent century, that was partly a reaction to what was arresting and limiting in that old axial operating system. You're then saying the modernity distortion has been that we saw the self to be the end of all things, and what you were weaving there is an experience whereby we are beginning to emerge from the self to whatever language you'll put to it. There's something bigger than self. And still, the language you used is so very important, because you're describing it's I am being called. There is a demand on my life from where? From my life, or from the something in me that's responding to the whatever it is that life itself is birthing through me that I cannot not respond to, inside of which I'm looking to discover that emergence where and here is the nuanced dance you're describing, you're still a sovereign individual emerging into something bigger through art, through appreciation, through connection with others. That is the operating system that I sense you're describing, and you're saying, we don't know what it looks like. Hey, we don't know when it will appear. We don't know what will be its shape and color and various expressions, and yet we cannot not respond to that summoning upon our life. That's how I'm experiencing what you were describing.
Yes, absolutely. I think what I'm trying to describe is life itself, not our the calling for life is so big. And we often don't let ourselves present to the calling of life. Some people call it God. Most tradition, if you like that, once you're in touch with that, often you discover that your joy is through service. And I think different things that happen through one's life, maybe some traumatic event, it creates like a fracture, a rupture, and it's like it can't come in. The movement of life gets stuck, and then it stays at a certain level. It doesn't go through. It doesn't circulate. And life, water, to be fresh, to be potable, it needs to circulate. It needs to move. Now, sometime when something like that happens, it's also an opportunity to heal, to grow, to go beyond. And what I'm trying to describe is that we collectively have experienced, I think, a huge trauma in our relationship to religion,
for example,
to religion and spirituality, which disconnect us to being able to receive and give, to let it flow. And that shows in our relationship to the earth, like the ecological crisis we're going through is a symptom of our disconnection. And you can go on about that problem, but that problem is just a symptom of such a disconnection, of a huge trauma. And a trauma, you don't heal it by beating on it, you know? You don't you got to bring a lot of tenderness and love, because otherwise it's just a fist.
Yeah.
And so that's why I'm trying to say is we need to understand that, it's a huge that disconnection. So in Metamorphosis, that rupture of separation, to be born, to gain awareness, like the fear of being lonely. We all hold that fear of being alone, utterly alone. And there's something really deep to heal in us, that trauma of separation, to see ourselves as separate from the earth, to see ourselves as separate from the other. Because I think sometimes why I'm trying to say that is that it can sound like, oh, I have the solution. We're going to go over there. Let's just be one. And I'm trying to say yeah, I know I need to be one, but most of the day, I don't experience my life as I'm freaking one, even with my husband. I victor with him. And I today was just I got on it because I thought we were leaving at this time and lunch was going to be ready, and he didn't make lunch. So I had to make lunch. I was oh, I'm carrying the mental load of the family and me. And then it's oh, who cares? And then it's okay, what is possible now? What is possible now? And so in my daily life, this is practice. Where can I practice the Dharma? Every time when I was oh, there's a diamond, there's a rock here. This is my diamond. This is my opportunity to practice. Even in the cooking lunch. In the cooking lunch, this is my opportunity for Dharma.
Yeah. I want to say something here that's so this is so perfect, because what I'm trying to, the dance is, sometimes in describing all this stuff, it can seem really like wonderful, but it's like, but a bit magical. It's like, we just need, we need to have more we go from I to we. Sure. Yeah, it's like that. But or other things, like just to even get more subtle, a lot of like on the spiritual trajectory, there's, if you like, there's the ultimate dimension, like in Buddhism terms, there's ultimate and relative dimension, right? There's a moment where you do feel one, as you go on retreat, there's a moment you click into it and like, oh man, I'm just one with everything, and everything just seems easy. And then you come back and there's the washing up, or there's the parking ticket to pay. And one of the great, in Buddhism, there's the ultimate dimension, and then there's the relative dimension, which is the washing up. The ultimate dimension is emptiness, or whatever more than that, form and emptiness of one and everything. And one big question is like, how do they connect? How do they dance between those? How do you actually dwell in those? That's a really rich question, which, for example, like even Buddha, even some of the great traditions don't really have a sense of like, how do you organize society? A very relative question, like, what does it actually look like? What does production look like? Buddha very wisely didn't talk about this. He said, I'm not involved. I'm just going to teach about how to transcend suffering. And I think why you're just sharing is like, there's this thing, and one very practical point is, I think just to kind of riff on what you were saying is, one thing, why is the religion, we keep talking about it, so some features of this decoding of a culture of the future, when you said earlier, I think, Aviv, that we don't know exactly what this future looks like, but I think we know certain principles. Yes. So like one principle, that there's probably something, a revitalization of a religion. And we use the term religion specifically, not spirituality, something actually organized that involves group, collective stuff. Maybe it has features. We've removed features we don't like in the past, not dogmatic anymore. It's open-minded. It's, not oppressive or things, but something like that. Mm. I think there's also an emphasis on inner development versus, as well as outer development, but a re-emphasis on inner development. We can mention other features.
I think there's many essence that I also touch upon, which is being able to hold. So now most people understand, there's multiple perspective, like the now different thing is like, there is no truth, there's many truths. And we would say that's not right. There are many perspectives, and yet there's an order to them. Like things have a home. And so it's like, now we've kind of like saw all this truth, and we're like, there's all these truths, but then we don't know how to categorize them or order them. So we put them all in those one shelf, and they're all on the, but no,
equal. They're all equally valid.
Postmodern pancake society.
Yes.
And we would say that's a great learning from postmodernity, that we want to take and integrate, that there's multiple perspective, and they have an order to them. They belong certain places, and it forms a greater, they're a component of a greater picture, which is the seek of truth, to seek the truth. The element of faith that I talked about, which I think is to revive dimension of like medieval age, the dimension of having faith is crucial. But with that, you also combine what came with modernity, which is questioning, but questioning in the service of truth. Because if you question just for the sake of questioning, it becomes a destructive force. The questioning in the siècle des Lumières, in the Enlightenment age, was of a service, to look into truth. Now questioning has become just a destructive force.
Sometimes, at least, yeah.
Sometimes, but also almost like an exercise just for the sake of it, rather than looking at this is again in a part of greater something. Our world has become so much more complex, and it demands us, therefore, to be able to hold much more complexity. Mm-hmm. Like, and that acceleration we talked about is it's not just an acceleration, but it's a complexity. And we human beings have not been able to we didn't grow to be able to hold that much complexity, to understand and to put it into their home. And I think finally there's something in the realm of trust that is a foundation that is currently not there. There's a breakdown in trust, and so the rupture of dialogue, when we see people can't talk to each other, is because there's no longer the foundation of trust. There's been a disruption of trust in regards to power. Like in the past, people would maybe trust the powerful one because they would trust that the powerful had the interests of the people at their heart, and vice versa. But there's a huge disruption in regards to trust. And this is where I think with modernity and the breakdown of religion came the destruction of morality and of ethics. And if you don't have that, if you don't have ethics, I move from morality to ethics because moral has a sense of bad and good and a judgment of the people. But ethics, I prefer to talk about the action of people. If you don't have trust and ethics, you don't have, and you're building something on quicksand. You're constantly doing the foundation because there's no trust. And you can't create a society where there's no agreement.
Along with our website at portalsofperception.org, Portals is also available on YouTube and on all podcast platforms, as well as social media. You can become an active member and join the conversation in community events. And you can help us get the word out by liking this content and by sharing it with your friends.